But the point being is that at a core level, from a casual standpoint, you can buy packs from your local friendly game store, and those packs are available for you to play Standard with. So it's more accessible in that respect. You don't have to, in the case of Commander, right? If you've got a bunch of people who play a lot of Commander, and they're all playing at home with their friends, you might find that if you just buy a structure deck of like something from, for example, you buy a Brothers War structure deck, you buy the Mishra deck. You might find that like your friends' decks are just a lot better than yours because they play cards from '98 and they play cards from 2006 and they play cards from 2015.
Welcome back to From the Vault podcast.
No, we can't do that. Hey everyone, welcome back to From the Vault. It's your boys Dylan and
Trent. Hello, welcome everyone.
And then just behind the scenes there's Connor.
Hello, Connor.
I am not one of the boys.
Hang on, no, you'll always be one of the boys. Everyone in the comment section, explain to Connor why he's one of the boys. And
a little B. Not capital B.
Lowercase b, capital Z.
We don't want to. No, we don't want that.
No,
because right now
you're not even a Z.
Hang on,
Wow.
You're so nasty to Connor.
I
he
am.
deserves better. No, there's a very like in the current like internet jargon. There's like little brother X, like little brother on the friend's account or little brother on the computer.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
I'm
it's a derogatory term now. You say like little brother on the X or Y. It's like it's like a new TikTok thing. I'm with it with the kids. I'm hip with the kids. Piper says a lot at the moment. Actually, they've been saying
Piper's with it.
Piper's with it. They've been saying
Well, anyway, welcome back to the podcast.
Welcome.
We're talking about just stuff that happens around store, things that we experience as store owner, store employee, and community members.
and gamer.
And
most
gamers.
importantly, and
Gamers.
The movie with Gerard Butler?
Damn.
That's wow.
That's a hit. That's a
and
callback.
Logan Lerman?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you rapidly. That movie was not very good.
No.
It really wasn't.
No. So, what are we talking about today, Dylan? In the world of gaming,
It's something that you brought up, actually.
it's interesting to me.
It's about rotation. And
What is rotation?
It's not when you move in a circular motion.
So if I close my eyes and imagine an apple and it's spinning, that's not rotation.
That's not the rotation we're talking about.
It is. It's just not what we're talking about today.
And it's definitely not the rotation of the Earth because the Earth is flat, apparently.
And also it's not an experience, according to some people I was talking to earlier this week.
But rotation we're talking about is in the context of trading card games, or even just card games in general, because there are living card games that have had rotation before.
And-
I'm looking at you, Android Netrunner.
And also, sometimes not even just card games, like talk about Legends. But anyway, moving forward.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Minis and Legends.
Minis and Legends, so there's other versions.
Basically, we're talking about rotation in a longevity sense of a game, right? So, for those that don't know what rotation is, rotation is essentially there's a point in a game's life where the publisher or the designers just basically say everything before this point is no longer part of this format or how we play the game in this way.
Yes.
Right? A lot of times, that's usually the most competitive format is the format where rotation happens. So we're talking, like standard in Magic terms, or we're talking matched play for the Warhammer.
Yep, for Warhammer. In Pokemon, it's just known as I think it's also known as standard actually in Pokemon.
Yeah.
So it's often known as standard because it's like the game's standard. It's like
it's the standard format of
this is how
playing the
most
game.
people are playing the game. This is what we design cards for.
How the publisher wants the most people play the game.
Correct. And in the case of something we talk about with Magic the Gathering, at the time it definitely was how most people were playing the game, if not all of them.
Yeah, not anymore.
We'll get to that. Spoilers.
So, just to give you an idea of how rotation works. Well, let's talk about it in the context of Magic the Gathering, because that is the most front-facing form of standard of rotation.
And also, it's the most topical because we're going to talk about what's been happening with standard as well in Magic specifically.
Yeah, as well. So, the way it works is it's a moving rotation. I kind of think of it as this fixed rotation and moving rotation. Fixed rotation is basically a point in time where they say anything before this point is no longer used. So we're talking about modern or pioneer in Magic sense, where they basically say from this set backwards, cards from this set forwards are the only thing that's legal. So that's like a fixed rotation point, or like a fixed point in the format. A moving rotation is basically a relative time period, right?
Well, I think, sorry if I don't want to correct you necessarily, but I think it's more like that's an example of like a single rotation, and what you're talking about is like a cycling rotation,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like, it's not really a rotation if it's the case where it's like, oh, all of this is gone and only this onwards is legal, and this and forever onwards is legal. That's not rotating in the sense that's just like there has been a single rotation. There's been one single cycle from this then to now. Whereas with their current standard rotation, what happens is it's known as a rotation because as sets come out, sets are sent away, and then sets come out, and sets behind are sent away. So as new sets come out, they get rid of older sets, and they do that.
That circular movement.
That circular movement, and it happens usually in the case of Magic. As sets come out, they push other sets out.
Yeah.
And in some other games, they'll pick certain points in the game's like life, and they'll go, hey, we'll do what we call the rotation now, where it's one big chunk, and they get rid of all this old stuff.
So with Magic's case, it's X amount of sets from a certain time period. It's gone through a lot of changes,
Which we'll get into.
I think it just basically started as like, oh no, I didn't get the time period. It was like the last couple of years, I think in 1995 when it came out, which, to be fair, is like basically when it started being a global game.
Yeah.
Because
it's almost 30 years ago now.
It's almost, it is 30 years. So yes, Type 2 or Standard was just like a rotating, is the rotating format they announced when the game was really fresh.
Yeah.
And then it just inherited a banned list and a restricted list from the vintage format, which is what's called an eternal format, which means it uses cards of all time.
Yeah.
And then it was mostly unchanged in that time period until we got to like 2015, where they decided that the way that they built Magic sets was called blocks, where you would have 2 big sets and a minor set all centered around the same plane and the same story. And that was called a block. So in 2015, they changed it to the 3 most recent blocks because they were changing how big those blocks were. They were getting rid of the mini sets and just having 2 sets per block. So they said, all right, well, the 3 most recent blocks will be in standard at all times. So as a new block started, the oldest block out of those 3, both sets went out. So it was usually around 5 or 6 sets in rotation at all time.
Yeah.
It was too fast for a lot of people. I think, 2015, that was the point where Magic kicked off intensely.
Well,
and the era of net decking essentially happened. We had online marketplaces like eBay and that were allowing and even I think back in like 2015, even talking about Channel Fireball and Card Kingdom and all that, like having these online e-commerce platforms now that made it easier for people to get hold of cards.
Yeah.
It made the solution to meta very apparent very quickly.
Yes, and also to add to some extra layers here, the important part is that we kind of went from the game of Magic, and this happened with all of the older card games where it doesn't anymore. You don't see this anymore because obviously the world's very different. But in the 90s, right, the only way to get Magic cards, except for just printing them out or writing them on paper or whatever, just like, having the mechanics doing whatever you want with them, the way to get real Magic cards was to buy packs, right? And buy them off your friends and trade cards. That's the only way to get them.
Even mail order was the only other way to get cards. If you were doing single sales, you had to have a catalog.
Correct.
And pick out the cards and then mail the money and the order list into whoever was doing it.
And exactly, it's so analog, right?
So analog.
And what ended up happening was that meant those e-commerce, well, it wasn't but like those are kind of singles companies were very rare, and you were often going to like card shops buying cards there. That was ways you get singles, that kind of stuff, right? But the singles as like a market was quite rare then. Mm-hmm. Well, what started happening was the consumer became the retailer over time. As the consumer and technology grew and people were able to access things like this important eBay, and again on social media platforms, they started doing their own marketplace and such. As that started picking up, people were able to start selling and buying their own cards, and people started realizing there was a real profit margin to this. There was a real way to make money here. So the consumer slowly but surely became this kind of retailer. And then those people who were picking up the big markets and trading lots of cards developed into these e-commerce companies that we see now with Card Kingdom and Channel Fireball. Yep. That's what started picking up. Now, that's with a huge group of people, obviously, those from event runners all the way to like pro players and, of course, these kind of marketers, these kind of consumers that became retailers. And then you could even say maybe members of people at in some cases. But that translated into this e-commerce world where now, and you see this now with new games that come out. We look at this with Star Wars Unlimited, where it's like the moment Flesh and Blood will speak like this too. The moment a game comes out, it's got an e-commerce platform. It's got people can just buy and sell cards. So there's this translation that started happening where it's like I can just easily go, I need these like 15 cards in my deck. I can just find them online and buy them.
Yep.
This didn't exist back then. So, and in 2015, this was still in the kind of fledgling era.
Yeah.
It still wasn't like as big as it is today.
And it was sitting in this space where online content was big, but the marketplace was still finding its feet.
Exactly.
So there was still meta being solved faster.
Yes.
But the access to the cards wasn't exactly the same.
So the speed of these blocks was a big problem.
Was a big problem. So they moved to this, they're 5 to 6 sets based on the blocks, which is really fast. It's essentially like 2 years of cards.
Yeah.
Anywhere between 2 to 2.5 years. And then they, in 2017, they changed that to basically have this like expansion and contraction kind of thing with rotation, which, to be honest, makes it quite hard to explain. But it does allow for more stuff to stay in. So it basically, the way it worked in 2017 was it grew to the last 8 sets and then retracted to the last 5, because this was also when they went through that change of doing single sets rather than blocks.
So forgive those on listening to us on Spotify who can't see what I'm doing here, but essentially it was like, it would start like this. It would start with your 5, and it would grow on the front end as sets came out, and then it would retract the last.
Yeah, once it got to 8, it dropped off the last 3 sets.
Yeah, it's very close to how Pokemon did theirs for many years and still do theirs now, which is Pokemon, they are, we decide, and it's a little bit more arbitrary because they don't decide based on the number of blocks, they decide based on where they want the format to be. Yeah. And usually it's based on like a new kind of game release almost, something like sort of Scarlet and Violet or Sword and Shield, whatever. They'll go, every World Championship, we'll do the World Championship. Straight after, we will announce what the band list is, the rotation is going to be, and then they rotate everything. I think it's like a week or 2 after, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, and they'll show it off. They used to do it like, we'll only announce it at Worlds, you have 2 weeks. But now they've started announcing it much earlier. And a lot of people, obviously, this is true about Magic too, you can still track what they're going to get rid of. You could be like, this is one of the most recent, one of the most oldest sets that are currently in Standard.
Yeah.
You can imagine that's going away in
and just to explain how Pokemon does it is they actually mark the cards with what's called a regulation mark.
Which is fairly modern of them doing, but yes.
Very modern now, yes. But it's like, what are they up to now? It's like G?
Yeah, G. I think it's G.
So they basically say the sets that have the regulation mark F through to H are currently in Standard. And then when they do that World Championships announcement, they're like, all right, well, F is going away, and now GHI or GH to J or whatever their set's going to be.
Correct.
So that allows them to keep moving things through and easily identify it. When you pick up a card, you go, is this in Standard or not? Unfortunately, Magic doesn't do that. Magic just says, these sets... they're in Standard.
Well, Magic also, to be fair, doesn't give a
Yeah.
They don't care about Standard as much as Pokemon does. To Pokemon, Standard is their entire game. To Magic, they have so many other avenues of gameplay that they go, it's if you want to play Standard, you'll work it out. Kind of, I think, from their perspective. And they'll go, if you don't want to work that out, you'll play other formats that are available to you. Whereas in Pokemon, it's like, no, first of all, we're selling this to children. And you make this very, very clear.
Yep.
However, I don't disagree, though, that Magic could benefit a lot from regulation marks. That's also just a conversation to have, I think, though.
Well, yeah, that's because in last year, they changed their Standard again, their rotation schedule.
And this is the big one.
So now it is the longest rotation's ever been for Magic, from what I understand. And it goes to the last 3 years worth of sets, which is a bit messy because it's also kind of that growth and retraction. So that means it extends out to the last 12 Magic sets, and then it retracts to the last 9.
12 sets.
But now we're also talking about what's a set that... So we're talking about Standard sets, or what's called Premier sets. So that means that, like... just an example, like, what do we got? Phyrexia All will be 1, March of the Machine, and Aftermath.
Dominaria United.
Dominaria United.
That's earlier, yeah.
Yeah. These are sets that are in Standard. But in that same time period, right, you also got like Lord of the Rings,
yes,
which is not in Standard. You've got like Modern Horizons 2, which is not in Standard. Commander Masters, not in Standard. Yep. Commander Legends, either of those Commander Legend sets, not in Standard. So Magic does release a lot of external, like a lot of supplementary sets.
Even in the products themselves, like Dominaria United has Commander exclusive cards all the way through it too.
Yes, and even Wilds of Eldraine had Enchanting Tales that are not Standard legal,
correct,
but also in the
boosters.
They
are limited legal and they are eternal legal, but obviously not Standard. So they're diluting their pool a lot as well.
It's a bit messy.
A bit. I would say just a bit.
Just a bit. So that's just the history of how Magic has done rotation, and then to an extent as well Pokemon, right? That kind of stuff. I don't know how Hearthstone does rotation. I forgot now. I haven't played it in a while. But I know that they have... Do you know what their current standard format is?
It's been a while, but they normally do theirs annually. They do like an annual rotation where they take certain sets or adventures, the solo player things where you can unlock cards, and they move those out. But the way that Hearthstone's a bit different is that they have like class core cards that don't shift with rotation or very rarely shift with rotation.
Yes.
But even then, some of those do get taken out of standard legality. So
exactly. And also they are the benefit, and this comes we haven't really talked about Magic Alchemy yet and Magic the Gathering Online, but that also is the benefit of being able to go, but if we want to tweak the numbers on a hunter card, we can.
Yeah.
So we don't need to rotate that card out, because if it's going to be a problem with how it interacts with all these other cards in standard, we can rotate it if we need to, but we can just tweak the numbers.
Yeah, we can nerf and buff in real time.
So standard is the last... It looks like the last year and a bit, year and change. Of sets, which is a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6 sets. So it's the last 6 sets essentially. And every year they change it, which is cool.
Definitely a kind of, I guess, for lack of a bit of pun intended, a bit of a standardization of how these companies are all rotating out their packs. Like they kind of know this is how many kind of cards we want in our standard game, in our rotating format.
Well, that's something then I guess we can talk about then, in the sense of why would a company want to do rotation? So
I think the first and most obvious one, right, is the money. Right?
Oh yeah.
The first most obvious one from the perspective, of the company, it gets people to buy more product, and it artificially forces them to do so. Now, obviously, I'm not going to... The word force is so powerful to be like, but you don't have to do that. But if you want to play standard... And at the time that these were introduced as a concept, let's say talk about Magic in 95, you weren't given other options. It was
there wasn't a singles market.
You can just play... Well, not just that, but it's like you can just play kitchen top Magic, but if you're going to your local friendly game store and you're going to play Friday Night Magic, they're going to play standard.
Yeah.
Because that's the format the Wizards is supporting.
Yeah. So and I think back then there was only Vintage was the other format.
Correct. So, and you could play Vintage, but that's when we get to the second point. But you can play Vintage, but and that forces people to go, well, if I want to keep playing with my friends, you want to play a standard format, I'm going to have to keep up with the money that they're spending as well. And the company wants you to buy more packs, but you buy more cards. And the second one, which is the perspective of the player as well, is that it's more accessible.
Yeah.
Because by definition, right, just by definition, it says if I come into the game and I go to a hobby shop and they have packs on the shelf, that's cards I can play in standard.
That's cards you can play in standard.
Whereas I don't need to go in, with exceptions to these rules, of course. Like, for example, your local store might just not have Brothers War in stock. I don't think currently we have Brothers War in stock. So no. I don't think you just might not have that in stock, but that's still available. Like they might get a restock in the future because that's just available to them to purchase. So the cards you want are available to you to buy in packs. Now, there's an argument to be made around the whole, look at Dominaria United with the $120 Sheoldred. There's arguments to be made around, how available are those cards?
That's what I was just about to bring up.
However, well, there you go. Both of the same brain. However...
Yeah, how much it costs at a, standard format.
Yes. I was going to say, you can also probably find the MTG Goldfish decks as well and have a look at, this current standard format. It shows, prices, if you bring up Goldfish as well. Sorry for those at home. Dylan's got his laptop out and he's also just looking up some stuff so we can talk about this. This is a very comprehensive subject, so we're having some... We don't normally have stuff up to look at, but we want to be more comprehensive with this. See, they'll tell you what you're doing. That's all in US as well. All right. But the point being is that at a core level, from a casual standpoint, you can buy packs from your local friendly game store and those packs are available for you to play standard with. So it's more accessible in that respect. You don't have to, in the case of Commander, right? If you've got a bunch of people who play a lot of Commander, and they're all playing at home with their friends, you might find that if you just buy a structure deck of something from, for example, you buy a Brothers War structure deck, you buy the Mishra deck, you might find that your friends' decks are just a lot better than yours because they play cards from 98 and they play cards from 2006 and they play cards from 2015. And they're just playing cards that you just cannot access. Unless you buy the singles from companies that are not Magic the Gathering, or unless you go to hobby shops and go through all their binders and they just happen to have this one specific card you need, you may not be able to play at the level they're playing at. In fact, it's very unlikely to be able to play at their level. And that disparity is much larger in a 4 of a kind format. Yeah.
This is kind of thing. like I want to talk about my experience of Standard as well, right? Like I made the mistake of playing Standard during that Takia era, and it was a drag. I remember it was the Origin Store Championships, and I had spent, 2 days straight brewing and testing with friends, ready for the Store Championship because it was Standard. I was like, yeah, and I got this really mean Black Green Elves deck. I had built it from
Shaman of the Pack?
Shaman of the Pack, baby.
Shaman
of the Pack, Court of Calling.
Oh, so good.
Dwynen's Elite. Like, just fat elves. I was very happy with it. But, and I'd spent all this time, I had gotten these cards from drafts at the store that I played at. And, I got the cards from drafting at the store and trading with my friends and doing the Magic thing, right? Doing the gathering part of Magic the Gathering, right? And built this deck, and I was really proud of it, and I was winning a lot of games with it. And then I went to the store championships, and, like, the only decks I lost to were the decks, like, ripped out of Pro Tour. Because they were net decks. They were decks that people, did the online marketplace purchase. So there's like a double-edged sword to accessibility, in the sense of not necessarily financial accessibility, but the accessibility of getting access to the cards and getting access to that meta information that kind of makes Standard hard unless you commit to the absolute best of everything, which I guess does also mean like these decks weren't cheap either that I lost to. Like, these were decks that were much more expensive.
Sure. So, but here's let's break this down just a little bit, right? Because the first thing that's most important is, like, I don't feel like it's necessarily fair to say that you need to have the accessibility of information, right? Because you had access to the same information they did.
Yes.
You just didn't utilize it.
What I was trying to... Sorry. Another key piece was the people that I was playing against at this store championship were not the people that I was playing against every week at store championship. These were people that came in for the store championship, and
they traveled. They were competitive players. They wanted to win.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
And
I'm sure that wasn't their first store championship.
I know, and it really put a really bad taste in my mouth for Standard.
I agree, but I think maybe you're talking about... I feel like you're maybe talking about something else here, right? Yeah. What we're talking about isn't necessarily whether or not the Standard format has anything to do with this problem. This is just a problem of, like, but I want to play the game at a very casual level, and these players don't. These players want to play this game as like a I think puzzle, like almost like a comprehensive clash of minds. Because, and this is an important thing to mention, I know what you're saying in the sense of they've stolen these decks from online, right? And they've just seen what works.
I don't want to say stolen. It's
they've copied and pasted, right? Let's just say, like, if somebody copy and pastes your NFT, they've stolen it, right? But anyway,
they're playing Siege Rhino.
They're playing Siege Rhino, whatever. They're playing. It's like playing Mono Black Devotion in Thera Standard, right? Like, people just work out the decks. It's like playing. I don't think. Like, I played a lot of the Kaladesh Standard, which was a far worse standard, by the way. Not necessarily in the case of how the rotation worked, but just in the sense of its
energy.
Not just energy, but also just like the constant banning, Smuggler's Copter, Sahili, Felidar Guardian. There was just a bunch of messy stuff in that block, and it wasn't the kind of format where you needed to break the ice to work out what was going to be insane. It was very surface level. It was going to be very powerful. You just need to spend the money. And this is true about any kind of more competitive format. And I think what you're saying is, like, Standard for you didn't work in the context of a store championship, but it did work for you in the context of an F&M and when you're playing with your friends.
Yeah.
Right? So it worked fine because it required you... It almost feels like the way we kind of talk about, at least here and at Netherworld, the Pauper EDH scene.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it requires you to kind of go through what you have and get what you can access. But these people just have such a greater grasp, like a greater access of stuff, both from an information standpoint and then an actual getting the card standpoint, right? Yeah. So I think it's almost like this isn't a problem with Standard. This is a problem with...
I guess, yeah, it's more of a problem with like
hyper-competitiveness in games. And I don't necessarily... I think that's almost like... I don't disagree necessarily. I think it's maybe a different discussion. But I think that there's a good point to be made here about Standard where it's like when you have a smaller format... those more powerful, like, archetypes are so concise, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is really good is probably very, not necessarily samey, but I would say like there just aren't that many options of what's really good because there just aren't that many cards.
It's a limited ecosystem.
It's a limited ecosystem.
And the cream rises to the top.
Exactly. And what's going to rise to the top is going to be maybe one or two archetypes, one or two different decks. And it's going to be, how do I find the tech pieces to make this my own? And at the same time, if I'm taking this deck from online, there is a level of like, I may not have chosen why every card is in this deck, so I don't have a comprehensive and considerable understanding of how all these cards interact with this deck does. It then takes a more competitive player and probably I would say a more fundamental understanding of the game and the format to then translate that into, I'm actually consistently winning with this now. Obviously, you have an advantage because your deck is very powerful, but there's going to be a level where it's like, I still need to pilot this properly. And I still need to have have smart side deck options. I need to know what the matchup's going to be like. Because again, he might have thrashed you in your game, but then he gets into round 4 of the tournament, and all of a sudden he's up against that deck as well, or a deck that plays at that kind of level, and a player that plays that kind of level as well. Now they need to have that kind of clash of power as well. So I think that there's something to be said about maybe your greatest issue being, I built something that I cared about and loved, and that didn't matter. Because caring about things and loving things in competitive play doesn't have a place.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I know.
So it's like, what you have to love and care about is being competitive. You have to, like, being in the seat against somebody else who's also loving and engaging with this competitive nature. What's actually happening in front of you for the cards and deck isn't nearly as important as what happens in the middle of the game.
Well, there's also another side then too when you talk about accessibility, where you match up the accessibility from the sense of you can walk in the store and get the cards out of packs versus the accessibility of those individual deck lists and those individual cards from marketplaces means that I would argue that there's a lessened accessibility when it comes to rotation, when it comes to standard formats and rotating formats, because when you talk about that investment in being a competitive player, you're also talking about the monetary investment in those cards.
I agree.
And I think one of the biggest factors about it's still an anecdotal evidence. There's no it's a correlation, not a causation here.
This is your experience.
This is my experience, but there's also the correlation, not the causation. So I'm not saying that like this is why it happened. But when you look at, do you remember when Frontier format was a thing?
Yeah.
The pre-Pioneer format that eventually became Pioneer.
It was before its time.
Yeah, it was well before its time. But Frontier is essentially Pioneer except from cards.
Correct.
And the big indicator for that for me was that time period was the biggest growth, not only in player base for Magic the Gathering, but it was also the biggest growth in secondary market. Because decks like Siege Rhino and Ataka and even, it's hilarious, in Soul Artifact, which won the Pro Tour Dragons of Tarkir.
Correct.
Like, Frontier was that standard format of Tarkir to current release. So it really looks to me, and the correlation I have is that up in secondary market value was the value of competitive standard rotating decks was immense.
Yes.
And it really hasn't changed now.
Sure, but let me add that the point where I talk about, hey, you can go to your hobby shop and you can go to your local game store and you can buy packs and those cards are playable in standard, is not to say that they are competitive. It is to say that they are legal to play in the sense that they are realistic. In the sense, like you said, right? When you talk about your Elves deck, right? That's a pretty strong deck. It does what it needs to do. And you were winning when you were playing it casually amongst your friends.
Yeah.
And when you went to F&M, tell me this, were you winning?
Not all the time, but most of the time.
Most of the time. Let's say, and this is very good, right? It's like a 60% win rate. Let's say that is really good. So let's say you had a 60% win rate. That feels like you're winning most of the time, and you technically are as well. Even if it's 75%, 80%, let's just say 60%, right? Well, but then you went to the store championship, and the meta game went, no, this deck actually sucks. This deck isn't competitive at all, at least compared to what we're playing, and we're just going to stomp on it, which is unfortunate. But it didn't translate to when you played at FNMs and when you played amongst your friends, you were losing as well, because not everyone was playing that. They all had that same kind of access. When you are playing casually, you're playing FNMs, right? And this is just from the perspective of, is this accessible? and you're playing casually. It is. You can go, I could buy a color boost, like make a deck. I can, as a good example.
To play standard on a basic level, it's a lot more accessible.
And this is even somewhat true, not nearly as true, but somewhat true about Pioneer. Like, in the sense that, like, when I start playing Pioneer, like, I play Azorius Spirits, which is actually a real deck, unfortunately for my opponents. It's a real deck. I play Azorius Spirits, and I just really love that deck because I played it in Shadow Standard without some of the cards I play today, obviously. But I really liked it. And I just had 4 of a kind of all those cards. I just had them for this long. So then I put them in.
Captain.
No, that was Innistrad. This is like Mausoleum Wanderer and Rattle Chains.
Yes, I remember.
Rattle Chains.
Rattle Chains deck. Was,
that's
spicy.
That's it. Rattle Change.
I just want to slide in with a point here in terms of like accessibility and stuff like that. I think there's also something to be said about the enfranchisement of people who turn up to F&Ms and doing drafts and stuff like that, getting access to those bigger pools of cards, but also because you're playing at your local game store, you effectively, that player base is almost like a pod, like a commander pod.
It's like a bubble, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bubble. You're existing in the bubble, and people would trade and communicate within that bubble and be like, all right, well, he's looking for this card and I'm looking for this card. We're all pulling packs. We're not going to be guaranteed to get 4 of the same card that we need. So in a way, if you're in amongst it and you're engaging with the format in a regular way, you are more likely to see sort of benefit from it because you'd be able to trade, or you could go buy cards off people, or
for sure.
I mean, I think back to like back in the day, the game traders, the Magic scene there when they were all playing standard, and it was a very like tight-knit group, and everyone's like, Greg's looking for 4 of these cards from such and such set.
I mean, it's
standard,
even the same jokes on Loading Ready Run videos from back in that era as well, where they're just talking about how like there's like the 8 people in standard that keep looking at chaff.
And that's the thing. What I was going to get to as well was when I talk about this spirits thing. Is not necessarily what I'm playing, but actually what one of my opponents played. He consistently had only all B1 cards, and he consistently just played Mites and like the card, the one that Scroll's Hive. He played Scroll's Hive, and he played like the White Sun's Twilight. And he has like Mites deck, and it was pretty rubbish, right? But he won a couple of games against me, and I didn't push the pin. I didn't go super hard and try to play competitively. I didn't side against him. I just we just played games, and in standard, I think that really does, or at least now we'll get to how this translates.
It's still playable in standard.
Yeah, that's true. We'll translate this forward into the conversation, which I think is where you're getting to as well, which is very important, and this is where you're kind of getting to too. But when you're getting those cards, you're playing casually. Those are really playable. But here's what I'm saying: and this is what I said earlier, and I want to come back to as well. Is if you're going to a commander pod, as a good example, which is kind of the big way people are playing, is that's the genuinely casual way to play, right? And you only have stuff from some Brothers War cards, and then you're not buying lots of products. Let's just say you're not a whale, or you're not getting heavily invested. You're just kind of buying
picking up drafts.
You buy a couple packs every week.
You might go to a draft every so often, but you're a 9-to-5 man or whatever you're doing, or a woman, of course. You might find yourself going, but my opponents all play things like Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study. It's not like competitive decks, but they just have cards like Mana Drain because they're just playing the game for a long time. They're all heavily franchised, 15 years old.
I mean, even the reserve list is a thing too.
Reserve list stuff. Yeah. You don't feel like you can impact. You feel like you can sit there. As a good example, we have a friend, Miles, who's just absolutely lovely. And shout out Miles. We love you, Miles. He has this kind of issue where he still enjoys himself because he just likes being around friends and we all just have a good time. But his decks just aren't at a level where a lot of us are at. Yeah. Because we're playing the game very comprehensively and he does not invest in a lot of product. And that's okay, but it's incredibly rare that he can take out a game of Commander. And in Magic, while yes, I'm never going to say winning is everything, it's just not. But it is something. Yeah. And it does feel good to win at all. So it's one of these things where it's it can be hard to continuously keep pushing if you're not ever able to impact because this really casual format just has every card in 30,000 cards of the game's history to access, and a lot of those cards just aren't balanced around the cards today.
Yeah, and was it 31 or something?
31k
over what?
31k cards, yeah.
Yeah, 31k over 78 or 79k printings.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah. So it's a lot of cards. So what ends up happening is you just get overwhelmed, and a lot of people talk about Commander overwhelming them. You get overwhelmed where it's well, I just can't do anything about this. And I just go, okay, well, how do I play a format? How do I play a version of Magic where we're kind of all in the same space because we all have to play with the same cards? That's standard.
And then you play Brawl.
And then you play Magic Arena, which is where we can go to next. Now, the important point I think you guys are kind of made, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the big problem we have today is, well, problem. That's not necessarily the right word, but the problem in the sense of like a mathematical equation where there's something at the end of this after an equal sign, is that, or like some other variable, is that the online prevalence and the prevalence of singles markets and the prevalence of
meta discussions and meta calculations.
Prevalence of meta discussions, meta calculations. Just like looking at that, like I said to you, so quickly, I was able to go, hey, just jump on Goldfish. It'll show you the prices. It tells you the meta averages, what all the different version lists are, what the powerful cards are.
14% of the standard meta at the moment, according to Goldfish, is Esper mid-range, and that's a $512 US deck.
Yes. So, and it gives you the information instantly. Yep. And I can just say to you, hey, go to this website, I'll tell you the information.
Or if you're playing on a budget, you can pick up Mono Red Aggro, which is 8.7% of the meta, and costs you $96 US.
No, and that's pretty.
Mono Red Aggro is always cheap. And
Red deck
always
wins,
effective.
dude.
Red deck wins
Red
always.
deck wins. Now, here's the thing, right?
To be fair, that is the only deck under $200 US.
Valid, but that's, and again, a different conversation for now. We'll come back to that. But this online prevalence is also kind of saying that if you wanted to play standard in your local friendly game store, what percentage of people in today's format, not talking about 2006 or 2000 or 95 or anything, what's the percentage of people that are going to be really playing with just the cards they have around or just what they wanted to build together? It's like very low. You're talking like this, and we saw this a lot in Flesh and Blood as a good example. It's very low. You're talking about probably like 20% of your tournament who aren't at least at a core level very, very aware of the standard metagame. At a core level, easily 80% of the players are going to be exceptionally aware of the standard metagame to this kind of mathematical level because the information is done, like the working out is done for them and the information is so available.
Do you think the shift to the speedy rotation that Magic went through back in 2015, I think it was, where it was very short, which meant you needed that monetary investment to maintain because we had just come off the Tarkia blocks, which had the really expensive standard decks because we had a lot of people getting into the game and wanting to play these formats, right? So the secondary market shot up.
And that was also just on the back of Liliana of the Veil Innistrad standard too, right? It was like just on the back of another a big standard.
Big standard. So do you think that push to a faster rotation meant that the higher level investment meant it really pushed away casual players?
I think to an extent. I think it's inevitable in the sense of like, I think that the nature of how sets were designed is probably greater than the need for speed. I think what ended up happening was sets became more and more self-contained and archetypes became more and more concise and I would say weirdly enough, obvious but well designed.
Yeah.
And when things are really well designed, they become more standardized and obvious. And I think as the dominoes started to fall and the pieces started to come together, it became more and more obvious what these powerful synergies and these powerful decks were going to be. So I think that by definition, this was always going to be the case. But I do think that there's a layer where that did attribute to why it happened so quickly. I think the need for speed of the format had people picking themselves up and going, no, we need to work this out more. I think we would still be here today and having this exact same discussion if that had never happened.
That's true.
However, I think that the reason why standard as a format slowly but surely died away for formats that are more eternal is to do with that speedy rotation. I think that didn't push out casual players as much as it pushed out everyone.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
And then they were moving on to, like modern. I think that was a thing I listened to a few podcasts over the last few years. And they say it was normally around the time of rotation when people really enjoyed a certain meta and they're like, well, I kind of really like playing with these cards. They kind of slowly made the jump over to modern because there was more cards and a more diverse sort of meta.
And not just that, while I like that you say a more diverse meta, because while that was true, what made it diverse is that newer cards are usually better.
Yeah.
Power creep in Magic is an interesting beast because the rare standard rotation tended to clip that a bit, and that's going to be the next point we'll get to. But what ends up happening is it doesn't matter. As the game builds and as the game gets more powerful, it's simply the creep happens.
Not to mention that modern is also a result of a fixed rotation point of anything before, was it Mirrored and Besieged, is not allowed in the format.
Correct.
So there was, you got that Wild West early days of sets having power levels that are all up and down, where finally, after, Ravnica City of Guilds, when the design team started getting their mojo flowing properly on full play design, then we start seeing Mirrodin Besiege.
It's 8th edition.
Everything from 8th edition
and
onwards.
Mirrodin.
Yeah, so it's not Scars. It's not Scars Mirrodin. It's the original Mirrodin.
It's the original Mirrodin.
That's what it is.
So the modern frame.
Yes.
But yeah, that's when it really
Well, that's
I guess vibed.
Yeah, let me get into that. So Mirrodin, Darksteel, Fifth Dawn, right? Mm-hmm. These sets are the most sets in Magic's history.
Yeah.
By definition, they are the Yu-Gi-Oh players. Let me tell you something right now. This is the Dragon Rulers of Magic the Gathering, and if you know what that is, kudos. This is the Dragon Rulers. This is the fundamental, comprehensive gameplay and philosophy shift of Magic the Gathering. From the release of Mirrodin, Darksteel, and Fifth Dawn, the whole way Magic cards were designed, the whole way the game wanted to play shifted fundamentally. This was like, no. This game is changing, and all the mechanics that are accessible to us are being accessed. Before, there was like a walking on eggshells nature to Magic. It started with walking on eggshells on stilts made of toothpicks, where you had creatures that were like a 6-mana 3/2 with no abilities. There was like walking on eggshells with toothpicks. This was where it was, okay, we put on steel cap boots and we run this course. That's what this set did.
This is when Infinity was introduced, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
This is when a lot of stuff was introduced. So like, modular, this kind of stuff. Skullclamp was introduced. I want to say Chalice of the Void is also introduced around this time, but I might be wrong there. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this is like a fundamental shift. The point being is that this completely split Magic community in half. This was like, I'm not playing Magic anymore because these cards are just broken. This set is just broken. I want to say Isidron Scepter was in this set as well. Just broken, right? And then there was a bunch of people who were like, wow, Magic's really cool. Actually, these cards are really cool. This is really, I want to keep playing this game. And then, as the game grew and as it built on, people missed it. All those that kept playing, this was the fundamental shift that made them want to play in the first place, so they would love it so much. And they kept with it, and they kept with it. And that's why Modern works, because a lot of the people who play the game today, who are heavily enfranchised since then, played because of those sets. So that's what makes Modern tick, right? So
That and Jund,
yeah, of course. Getting Junded out is always going to be classic. Now, this is the important part. In Modern, as you get past Mirrodin, Darksteel, and Fifth Dawn, and you kind of move into Dark Ascension, Innistrad, you get the Liana the Bale, you start heading towards Dragon's Maze and as you get to Return to Ravnica, and you get to Shocklands, you start hitting the Theros, Nykthos and Devotion, you start getting into finally Khans, Fate Reforms, Dragons. As you hit that wall, the power creep's going up. And this meant that this was also a non-artificially fresh format. People realize that the game can be fresh, but it doesn't have to be artificially fresh. And if you're playing something like Siege Rhino, that's like an example we keep using, you can play it in Modern. Now, I don't think that's true today.
No.
And when I say I don't think, though, it's objectively not true today. But at the time, it was true. You could play Mono Black Devotion in Modern. It wasn't like it was in Standard comparatively, but you could play it.
I could play my Storm Chaser Mage deck.
You could play your Storm Chaser Mage deck, not during Khans, but yes, you absolutely could.
The number one meta deck for Modern at the moment still has a card that was released in Lost Caverns of Ixalan in it.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's playing...
Tashanda's Tidebinder.
That card's really good, though. But that's the thing, and that's, cards are really good.
Yeah.
There's a card there's a card that I was really confused that's in competitive EDH, and it's an uncommon from Kamigawa Leon Dynasty. And it's seeing you playing competitive EDH, which is often divided by here's all of the classic stuff, and then here's some new random.
Is that the discovered
stuff.
one that they just updated on Alchemy?
I don't know. No, it's like an artifact. It's like cyber trespass or something. It's like an artifact. It's it has a channel ability, which is I think it's bounce. It's a channel bouncer card. And I think that is good enough because it's not a spell.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think Kinnan players play it. It's a whole thing. I wish I had the card. I'd ask you to pull it up, but it'd be a long time. You'd have to find it. It's like an uncommon coming out. The point being is that newer cards are often better. And I kind of forget where I was going with this exact point. But the point being is that this kind of rotation of Standard, people started becoming disillusioned by it.
Yeah.
Because when you realize, but the freshness of this isn't actually a pro. It just happens to exist because of Magic's innate design.
Yeah.
And their innate design philosophy. So that's just kind of a thing that exists in Magic anyway. No matter what format I play, I'll probably get something refreshing. So I don't need that pro from Standard anymore. And then you talk about the accessibility. And you go, but it's as accessible to me as my wallet is empty. because it's so expensive and I need 4 of everything, and people will solve it before I get a chance to pull those out of packs organically.
Yeah. So now you need to buy the singles.
Now you buy the singles. If you're buying singles, any other format can get you there, and that's another pro where you go, that's kind of magic. Any format can get me that kind of nature of it's accessible if I spend money online. So now it's another pro where you kind of go, what is this giving? What is this? What do I get out of this?
Well, that's
the
real
magic.
That's the real the whole the big breakdown between rotating and non-rotating eternal formats is that point in time where you can just go, I mean, I can keep investing to stay up to date, or I can just stop my investment now and play with what I've got and then invest a little bit extra here and there over time that will still let me play with these cards, which is where Modern essentially came out. And now, to an extent, I think, Wizards of the Coast has tried to capture that with Pioneer by creating a new Modern format. People were like, oh, Pioneer's just what's he doing a standard Modern? But in reality, when Pioneer came out, it had was it just a little bit more, there was more cards in Modern to now than there were when Modern was created, but from cards that were released to when Modern was created.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, I was like, chances are.
Plus, I think there's a bit of a complaint amongst the Modern players there for a while that a lot of the older cards that were just staples of the format were getting harder and harder to get outside of the occasional reprints or whatever. And again, more and more people would come into this boom period in which Pioneers kind of captured. More people would have more of those cards.
It's definitely valid to say 100% that we did kind of hit a wall where there were so many cards in Modern that defined Modern that there weren't new cards coming out that compared with
Bridge from Below.
Bridge from Below.
Yeah.
Even Prime Titan. That's a big one. Amulet Titan. That's still a deck today.
That's still
That's still a deck today.
It's number 3.
It's number 3. It's number 3. Look at that. So Amulet Titan.
Thanks, One Ring.
Thanks, One Ring. But Amulet Titan, Primeval Titan is Bandit Commander for good reason, and it's just such a powerful. It's so hard to print cards because you're not going to make a standard format where you have a card that competes with that in Modern. You're never going to print that into Standard, and that's the big thing. You're never going to print that into Standard. So how is Modern going to, once it hits that wall, how's it going to get refreshing cards? And then it was like, well, we're going to have our own format, but we got to have to print for Modern. And they started making them on Horizon sets where they started printing for Modern.
And then they also boomed for Commander as well because it was illegal at all Eternal formats. So.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And look, Modern Horizons, when we talk about the Modern Horizon sets, obviously, them coming out did shake up the meta quite considerably with Modern, in the sense that several cards had to be banned from it.
Yeah, can I say, sorry, very quickly, I want to say, this is a common, not to say that you're wrong, because I know where you're going as well. I think you're correct. There is a common rhetoric I hear about Modern Horizon where it's like, but it fixed up the format. It mixed up the format. Things changed. The game was so stale for a while because things that were the best. And Modern Horizons at least shook up the format. And it's like, that should be a silver lining. It should be like I want to make this point, but Modern Horizons shook up the format. Here's the point about Modern Horizons I want to make, but silver lining, it did shake up the format. Because shaking up the format to me is almost like a buzzword where it's like, what does that mean besides the cards are broken? What does that mean besides the cards are insane?
It made archetypes playable, or certain other archetypes more playable, which gave great... And there were archetypes that were not heavily supported in the current Modern... if you look back at the history of Modern meta, I saw a really great timeline image from pre-Modern Horizons releases it's fantastic to see. It was the meta tracking of decks, and it was affinities up here, and then a couple of sets later, now affinities dropped 1 and Junda's jumped up 4 spots. And then next set is both of them have gone down 1, and then an Azorius deck's gone up the top or whatever. These kind of it was almost with each set, it wasn't a set rotation for the format, but the decks that did well in the meta rotated as well.
It was like a pseudo rotation.
It was a pseudo rotation, right?
Decks became so. This is why the rotation comes up, because decks became so incomparably good that decks that once existed within the meta also didn't exist.
Yeah.
So that's why they call it that pseudo rotation, because Modern is not a format where you play FNM with friends.
Yeah,
it's a format where you play competitively, even with friends. So I'm not going to be bringing Storm Chaser Mage, for example, because that deck just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So when a deck isn't, I would say, favorable in the format, doesn't have to be the most competitive, but favorable, you don't play it. There's no. You can have pet decks and pet cards, but they better be good because they're not playable. So what ends up happening is I'm not playing this deck, and if I'm not playing this deck and I feel that I can't, it might as well have just rotated out. I might as well not be allowed to play it because I'm not allowed to play it. Yeah. I'm not allowed to play my Bant deck because Fury just one-shots my board. I can't play Noble Hierarchs in Modern. How hard is that to comprehend?
I mean, when I'm saying about those deck movements happening, it isn't like a deck goes up to 20% of the meta and everything else gets shunted down. We're talking 1% to 2% of the meta, which when you compare to Standard is nothing.
Yes.
A lot of decks in Standard, when they're moving through like the meta percentages, it's a shift of 5+% every time. Yeah. But with Modern, it was like, this deck's just like a little bit better and winning a few more, and then this deck's winning a few more, and this one's gone down, and then Eldrazi Winter happened after Battle for Zendikar, and just like completely ruined Modern, so they banned it after LSV won a Pro Tour or something like that.
Lest we forget Hogak Summer.
Well, that's the one we talk about Modern Horizons, right?
Yeah.
Like, when I talk about shaking up the format, what I don't mean is, ooh, everything's new, ooh, buzzwords. It's about like taking strategies and archetypes that were on the lower end of usage, which meant that the cards for those decks were on the lower end of prices, and allowed those decks to operate in a more consistent manner that expanded the accessibility into that format from a monetary value. Because the biggest hang up to Modern that I've heard for years until Modern Horizons came out was it's just so expensive to get into Modern.
That's true, right?
And when I say that, I should also note that it has crept back up to there.
Yes, but also what made Modern expensive was rarely the staples. Like, it was rarely like it wasn't like I'm playing like Prime Titans weren't heinously so expensive you couldn't afford to play them. And like, yeah, Arcbound Ravager was a very expensive card during your Artifact Affinity. I think it's like $50 a piece, and that's expensive to get into for sure. Yeah. I don't disagree, but what ends up happening is like there's the fetch lands, the kind of consistent staples,
shock lands back in the day.
Yeah, those were the expensive stuff. Like you can reprint the cards in Modern and they would go down. It's not going to make them that's printing money for Magic the Gathering Wizards, and it makes those cards go down. They didn't want to do it, and I understand that. Yeah. But they had the capabilities of doing that, right? There's resolutions that aren't, we bring out new cards and artificially pump these decks back up. Like, because I also heard a lot of like, oh, well, Jun just isn't very good. Jun just isn't a great archetype. And then you have Hogak, and it's like, wow, Jun's out there again. It's really doing stuff. But it's like,
and then they ban Hogak, and it goes down a little, and then they're here's Modern Horizons 2 with Grief and Fury.
Sure, but you understand that. Sorry, you understand that like the artificial inflation that's happened, right? Like, you can even see that line. It's like Hogak comes out, it's broken. Okay, sees play. The event, like Hogak's, we should add, that's like an extremity, because Hogak was disgusting, and there were the events where it's like you played it or you didn't, and then
it was like 65% representation at most pro events for that whole summer.
And then it was like, oh look, we made a huge mistake. We have to hit Bridge from Below, but we also have to hit Hogak. I think it was Bridge from Below first, right? And then Hogak, if I remember correctly.
They tried to pull back Hogak.
Hogak, and they were like, actually, this card's busted because what we've done is we've tried to artificially inflate a deck that just isn't doing what it needs to do by introducing cards that do everything for it.
Yeah.
And then we have to hit those cards. That's the same thing about, talk about Stoneforge Card Advantage Mystic, right? So we talk about Scam, and you talk about, this was like mostly like a bad Death and Taxes build, right? And then you got the Incarnations. The Incarnations.
Yeah,
yes.
the Incarnations.
The Incarnations in Modern Horizons 2. And all of a sudden you got Grief and Fury and Solitude and the other two that nobody plays. In sideboards, I think Endurance sees some play. But yeah, it's like that was so powerful that became like play or don't. Like Rakdos became play or don't. Like. And now it's on this, it's saying it's 6.1% of the metagame with just Griefs left. And that's because it's playing Orcish Bowmasters and Ragavan.
Yeah, which are
also
two
Modern Horizons
modern
product.
designed, a modern exclusive set, so straight to modern sets that were designed in the last 5 years.
Yeah, with Ragavan being designed to kind of pick red back up, and then Orcish Bowmaster designed to answer Ragavan.
Let's put them in the same deck, guys.
Well, of course you would, right?
Yeah.
And that's the frustrating part, where it's like, I think we're kind of going in a different discussion now. We're going on wheels.
Look, I would say that the value, the Modern Horizons change to the accessibility from a monetary standpoint, to the pricing standpoint, I think really helped. But
I mean, Furies were expensive.
Sorry?
Furies were expensive.
Yeah, they definitely are now.
Well, they were
at
at the
that time,
they were
yeah,
valid,
because
yes.
they got solved.
Murktide Regen is incredibly expensive even now.
So, yeah, the shake up of that, the changing of that meta, like it lasted for a short period of time and got some people into the game. Not to mention that also by having these in a saleable product now meant that you didn't have to buy the singles, or there were a lot of singles flooding the market for these decks as well, because people were cracking them open and selling them on that secondary market. So yeah, there was a greater like monetary economic accessibility to it. But yeah, nowadays it's back up to the $1,000 mark.
Yeah, I'm looking at these prices like this is insane.
I remember Modern Horizons and just prior to Modern Horizons 2, like a lot of decks dropped down to $700. And when people, and look, that's still a lot.
Yeah.
But when people come to you and say, "Oh, it's just so expensive," it's like, well, it's not $1,200 anymore.
Yeah.
But it's $700.
It's still a lot. It's still a lot.
It's
Do you
$700
think that,
American
especially
dollars.
now with the times that we're living in and seeing like prices like that for cards,
That's different.
Do you think that's why we're kind of seeing more people who are engaging with Standard moving towards the arena format?
Yeah.
Well, let's keep that good point. You're bringing this back up to Standard, because let's talk about very quickly the fact that what we're talking about with Modern, why this whole discussion exists, is because there was another thing where rotation at least says that powerful archetypes will disappear and new powerful archetypes will exist, which is like, if I don't like this identity of a deck, it will go away, and then I can come back like, I don't like energy because it's a disgusting mechanic. Eventually that will go away and something else will replace it, which I can then, maybe I really enjoy werewolves, and that will show up. I mean, that never showed up, but whatever. Let's say in a perfect world I could play werewolves, and all of a sudden, like, Cemetery Trespasser, I guess, but that will show up. I can now play this thing that I do like, and maybe that's what the metagame that I play. Maybe that's the more competitive version I play, because I really want to play this certain thing, and I really dislike this other thing. But then you look at other formats that have this pseudo-rotation, or even formats that just do rotate, where it's like, but it's some other vein of the same thing. It feels like the same thing happens, but it's a different coat of paint.
Well, that also like was bringing up a segue for me too when I was talking about Modern Horizons, in the sense of how hard it is to design mechanics and themes around a meta that already exists.
Yeah.
Like the real positive to rotation is it basically allows designers to sit down at a table and go, everything that we've ever made before this point means nothing.
Yeah,
obviously it doesn't mean that anymore, because they're designing cards for Standard, for Commander. But when in that era where Premier Standard sets were designed for standard environments and standard formats, it meant that we got a powerful thing here and there that is still played in Commander. Like Cyclonic Rift is a staple in Commander, but it was designed for a standard environment. So yeah, I forgot where my point was going.
Paying 7 mana in a standard environment's pretty rough.
It's pretty rough, yeah.
And it's bouncing one person's board.
Yeah.
Look, I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What I was trying to say was that like it really shows that like it's really difficult to design for a pre-existing meta.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get into when I was talking about power creep earlier. Where
Exactly.
It's like, power creep is something that doesn't need to exist as heavily, and that's why Pokemon is a very interesting game, that it has such intense power creep when it doesn't need to. But that's not the point.
Yeah.
It's weird that EXs have so much health when Vs had so much health, and the EX before that had a lot. Like they all have less health than each other, but there's still too much. And then look at like Mewtwo EX back in the day, like 120 health. Sorry, I'm going into a Pokemon discussion. But point is it doesn't need to exist in the kind of egregious way that it does, because you can say Liliana the Veil doesn't exist in Standard, so we don't need to make a Planeswalker that competes with it.
Well, there's I'm kind of getting almost a kinship here with kind of how Yu-Gi-Oh does things, where they don't necessarily, I'm not sure how they do like a rotation or whatever, but I know that certain archetypes fall away over time, and then 1 or 2 cards will get released in a set 5 years from now, and then suddenly, this entire archetype's back. Like I remember back a few years ago, there was a card that had come out for, I think it was Gem Knights was the archetype, and you were really keen for playing it, and you're like, they finally printed this card, which actually makes it viable.
Yeah, so the thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! So I'll talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Now. This is a good trend. I'm really glad that you mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh! So Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have a rotation. In fact, it's never rotated. In all of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's never ever rotated, right?
That explains the card text.
Yeah. Now, Well, it's introduced, it's updated to errata card decks. There's things like piercing now and banishing. They used to be like removed from the game. Anyway, point being, or removed from play. Point being, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has never rotated. And that's the interesting part, right? So Yu-Gi-Oh! Is... sorry for Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, but it's a chud game for chuds. Now, it sucks
Clip it.
It sucks so bad.
That goes
right?
on a shirt.
It sucks so bad, okay? It's such a crap game. But people love it because it doesn't rotate. It works, and it lives and it breathes as still a freaking top 3 monster of a game. Because you never lose your cards. Here's the important thing. What Yu-Gi-Oh! Has, and this sounds like, if you told a Magic game this, they're like, la 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 la, I don't want to hear it. It has a huge ban list.
Yep.
And a very comprehensive one that updates quarterly. It hasn't always done that. It used to update yearly. It used to update every 6 months. Then it updated quarterly. Went back to 6 months. Now it's back to quarterly. And actually, no. It's now, so it's not quarterly anymore. Now it's, I actually do mean this when I say this, whenever they feel like it. It now happens. Literally, Konami's been like, we'll just update it when we update it. That's like literally it. When we decide it needs it to happen, it will happen. Yeah. Now, there's some things to talk about. The first thing is the monetization angle of a ban list, which is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Konami, the company, they can decide, we've made the money we needed from this archetype or from this kind of set. Cool, we can ban its cards now that it's covered its base. And they can ban cards. They can be like, we want to release a structure deck for an archetype that needs what we call legacy support. So, for example, yes, you could be like Shadows, which was a very popular archetype in the rise of the Pendulum format in Duelist Alliance. They can release a structure deck way later on and say, their boss monster construct that was like so broken back in the day, it's not as good anymore. Bring it back to 3. We just haven't touched it for ages because we don't want to open that can of worms. But now we want to sell decks. We want to sell cards. Let's unban this. Now all the shit players come crawling out of their cockroach dens and play the game again. And that's great, right? Well, you can't nuke a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player. They don't go down. Now, that's great, right? Now, that's awesome. It lets people play the game. Lets people enjoy the stuff they love. But that's what makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Work. It's the fact that it never rotates. That's so important to the game. And when your deck goes away in Yu-Gi-Oh! It goes away competitively. This is close to like the modern thing. It doesn't go away literally. And the thing about it is that, a deck can come out like Necros, as a good example, which was like the Shining Forces. It was absolutely just fundamentally broken, okay? And they could be like, okay, but we're going to ban like this card. Like Necros of Bryanak. We're going to ban this card that's obviously the problem. Like this one card does too much for the archetype. We're going to ban it. And you can't breathe. You go, okay, that card's banned. Let's see what we can do with Necros. And then, of course, you have players who are diehard fans, and they are comprehensively very good at the game, and they know what to put in the deck, and they will still play this deck, and they'll still 3-0 events every Yu-Gi-Oh! Locals they'll go to, because they still know how this deck works inside and out. They'll find the ways to make things work. I remember when people were playing Necros, a good example, they played a card called Deskbot 003, because it allowed you to just do this thing where you would play like a synchro, and it would negate anything, and you'd search a different Necros, and because of that, you skipped the Bryanak step of discarding to search a Necros. Like, you kind of did this late version of it. But then people kind of went, whoa, but this floodgate that negates things also translates into the same card. This is actually, it's not better, but it feels better. And people don't expect it from a deck where their searches got banned. So you go, okay, it's revolutionizing the deck now. And people are having to find flexible and poetic responses to this. So it makes the game feel very alive. And like Connor said, that kind of what I touched on before, that legacy support can really pick up decks that, didn't have much to play with. And they can take this aesthetic and pick it back up. The same way, right, when Ixalan rotated out and dinosaurs didn't exist in Magic for a long time, they can be like, here's a little dinosaur in a core set. Here's a dinosaur in, War of the Spark.
Here's some dinosaurs in a Commander product.
Here's some dinosaurs in a Commander product. And then, let's stick to standard for now, but yeah. And then you go... the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And it's like, here's all the dinosaur stuff. And it's like, whoa! And that's like really exciting, right? Well, in Yu-Gi-Oh!, because it's so archetypal, as in like, it's not so much dinosaurs, it's like Sun Empire is like the deck. It's the Sun Empire this, the Sun Empire that, this of the Sun Empire, that of the Sun Empire, Sun Empire's Fury, that kind of stuff.
Everything's keywords.
Everything's like keywords, or it's like the name of stuff matters more than anything else. You can then go, okay, but we'll just release a bunch of new cards that say Sun Empire. And then all of a sudden, those people who play Sun Empire back in the day and have the old cards, just buy a couple of new cards times 3 and go, I've got a really powerful deck. And then those who don't have those older Sun Empire cards really can't access that deck. So then it creates this kind of like weird, like, I don't use the word like elitist because it's not really fair, but it's more like there's kind of this breakaway of like, oh, well, those people who played back then, those heavily franchised players, can access this deck and play it.
It's like a rotating click.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then those who don't play the newer decks that just have all new support in them. They're just like, this is all just brand new cards, because every set that releases legacy support also just releases a whole new deck in there. And you could be like, oh, my scrap deck just got a card called Scrap Wyvern. It's a cool little link monster. And your opponent has probably never even versed scraps. And then they go, I'm going to play my Albaz deck, which is just way better than the scraps. Or my Eldritch deck, which is way better than the scraps. And they verse the deck and they're like, oh damn, Factory just summons anything from the deck? Oh, you just made 2 like level 9 twin hunter attack twin dragons? Oh, I can't destroy anything of yours because you just play 15 monsters from the deck and like go off and make a huge board? This is really bad. So all of a sudden it's like, you're going to just 2-0 them at locals. And then the next time they verse that, they're going to have to work out what they're doing. And if they're playing sideboard against a crappy scrap deck, it's like, wait a minute. You know what I mean? So Yu-Gi-Oh! Just has like a very, I think, interesting and poetic nature about how they kind of release cards. And that nature of being like, I can invest in cards akin to Commander, and I can keep all these deck cores with me. And then, they just need that special sauce. That special sauce.
It's a very curated kind of ecosystem.
It's super curated.
Whereas Magic, they kind of just, we release the cards out into the ecosystem and we let the inhabitants figure it out. Whereas like Konami, like, they look at it from the economic view of like, all right, well, we've made our money off this card, ban it, but if we filter out, some legacy support cards and some structured decks or the newer set, we're going to make money because people are going to scramble for those cards.
And here's the really cool
it's like
one,
a
right?
Sleeper kind of.
Yeah, and here's the cool thing as well. For the secondary market. So a good example, I'll go to the Shadol decks, right? This is a good example, right? So Shadol's come out and they got some really cool cards in their new structure deck. Well, it's not new anymore, but like when it was new, they got like a Shadol that was called like Re-Shadol Wendy, right? And this deck wasn't super competitive, but it was good. You could play it locals. Mm-hmm. But this Re-Shadol Wendy was like, when I read this card, I was like, this is the most broken Shadol card I've ever read. This is like, if I was a kid and you asked me to make the perfect Shadol card, I would have made this. It's like the perfect card. It's actually reads broken. But because it's supporting an archetype that it has a bunch of cards that read, this was designed in like 2015, or I can't remember now, maybe 2015. This was designed like at some point. Yeah, it must have been, maybe 13, whatever. I'll say 15. So they read like they was in 2015, and we're in 2022, I think it was, that deck came out, or maybe, 2022. Maybe 3, whatever. Timeline's weird. But like, its supporting archetype does feel very good. This card, just no matter what it says, no matter what, is never going to compete like that, right? But then, if I buy that structure deck, most of the cards are commons, right? Because it's a structure deck, and that's a super. And then I look at the deck, and I'm like, oh, there's an El Shadol construct in here, but it's a super, right? When it first came out, it was an ultra rare, had an ultimate rare printing, which is like, it's like an etched foil, but only the background of the art is etched foil. And then the whole card is common, and the creature itself is common, the monster is common. So it's like this really like elegant foiling to it, just looks gorgeous. And you go, I could have this $1 El Shadol construct for my structure deck, or I could go buy the $28 US ultimates from a friend of mine in their binder they've had for years. And it just makes the trading economy so live. Because like, I really want that cool, because it's the original art. In the new art, she's kind of doing one of these like, I almost don't want to do the pose. It's kind of this weird pose. And she's going like to the left, and her face looks a bit odd. And I was like, this art's not very good compared to the original. And the original, she's like got both arms are like this, and she's like floating above a huge army of like, and she's got all these like purple, they're literally marionettes, so these huge purple like wires shooting out of her. She's controlling all the marionettes of this army, and it's such a cool looking card. Like, I really want that. So then your friend can have a card they've never moved in, and it's just sitting in their binder just collecting dust. And now they're like, do you have like Viking stuff from the new deck? And you're like, yeah.
Or Azir.
Or yeah, that kind of stuff. Like Azir, have you got this kind of stuff that's modern? Yeah. Oh, I want that. And then that's it. And it makes that's very exciting.
It's the trading card element, which is kind of listening back about, the nature of Standard, when a lot of it is, I can just go to singles vendors and this. You miss out on that live community participation in the act of trading cards.
Yeah. You know what's really interesting about Yu-Gi-Oh? So I just want to say one last thing about it before we get into the next point. Interesting about Yu-Gi-Oh is Yu-Gi-Oh has a modern format. Do you know
That's
that?
the GOAT format, isn't it?
No. So the GOAT format is more like vintage, right?
Yeah. Okay.
They have a modern format, right? It's called Edison, okay?
Edison.
It's called Edison. Now, I don't know why. Put in the comments why it's called Edison. I actually don't know why it's called that. But my friends play it, right? And it's reverse modern. So instead of going from this point onwards is legal, it's from this point back. And everything that's come out since then is illegal. Now, forget all of that. None of that's legal. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so caught up in its eternal format that even the older formats are eternal. I kid you not, it's literally it's everything from like the first structure decks for 5D. So the synchro monsters were first introduced to the game, basically. Like Junk Warrior, if you ever watched like 5Ds. It's like that and back. All the way to Blue Eyes White Dragon. Because that's just what people love about Yu-Gi-Oh! And it will always work. That's why when I play a lot of it casually. And I don't play like I used to play very, very hyper competitively. I don't go to events and such. My friends talk about going to YCS. That it happened this weekend. I think it's this weekend, YCS, actually. It's around the corner. It's like Sydney. Yeah. And my friends are talking about going, and like a couple of guys at Good Games were talking about it. Like, oh yeah, we're getting some singles together, make sure we're ready for YCS. We're sending some guys down. We're all going to be a big thing. Still a huge thing. I think 1,500 players, something huge like that. Damn. Yeah, big events. And it's like, and there's a lot of like hype and people getting excited circulating. Yeah. And then I'm like going through buying stuff, and I'm like, I had this deck that I love called Aroma, and it's like a deck all about the like little fairies that make like scented candle stuff. Very ironically, they like scented candles and scents, and then they just got like a swathe of support, like a bunch of new cards, and I was like, I'm gonna get these. And it's like, and that's like, I was like, oh, what do you want this for? And I'm like, oh, well, I like this deck, and this is why. And he's like, do you have any plans for it? I'm like, well, and I show him the deck. I'm like, well, here's the line. This is what the board ends on. He's like, oh, that's really good, actually. He's like, that's really good. I'm like, yeah, well, it's not going to do anything against, like, Snake Eyes Popular, but, like, it'll be fine. And, yeah, no. It's just, like, I think it makes me very giddy when I can be like, these decks I've had for so long and I've collected. And I remember the exact day that I got these and all the friends I talked to then and where we've all been with our lives and such. And I can just kind of add to that. And I just had that as a, like, closed thing.
That's very interesting how that all plays into that constant eternal format then. Like, do you think that plays into a fact that there's a possibility that that Yu-Gi-Oh! And the designers of Yu-Gi-Oh! Have basically accepted that even though the formats aren't rotating, the player base always will be?
Yeah.
Whereas with Magic, the typical American capitalism thing of must have all customers infinite growth at all times means that they're not willing to lose players through a rotation, even though that's going to be like, let's get real here. Like, Commander changes. Like, the Commander player base we have in our store is nothing like the Commander player base we had 2 years ago.
Correct.
Let alone like when the store opened in 2016. It's vastly different now. Yeah. So the idea of players rotating in and out, like, if there's an acceptance of that, maybe that's where Magic can better design their eternal formats.
Yeah, I think that Wizards has this mindset. It is almost like a cultural thing. Wizards have this mindset of like kind of like an open funnel where it's like we just want to keep reaching out and reaching out and reaching out. This is obviously true. We're not going to get into it today, but like this is obviously true with like Universes Beyond.
Yeah,
reaching out,
exponential
broader,
growth and reach.
Broader. Yeah. We want more people. Broader. Make the money. Hasbro. Broader.
Yeah,
right.
We need to because Hasbro's in dire straits.
No, we're talking about now. No, we're talking about. Anyway,
no, Furbies are not. People aren't buying Furbies anymore.
Anyway, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like, and like a lot of these Japanese games is like, no, we have like this, and this has always worked for us, and just keep this line going. The thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Right, which is interesting, is that what do they tug on the most? What is the most that makes me excited about Yu-Gi-Oh! That I've talked about so far? It's got to be the nostalgia.
Yeah,
and I think that's the thing about. You're not going to have Yu-Gi-Oh! If Dark Magician and Blue Eyes and Red Eyes Black Dragon aren't in the game.
But you know how Watsy's doing that? Retro frames,
and you remember Fallout 2? Like, you remember Frank Horrigan?
His 4 cards.
Yeah.
Oh God.
You've never met Frank Horrigan.
Well, yeah, that sounds like that sounds like a very mixed response to when you talk about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Like eternalized format and how they do their card designs around bringing people in. It feels like it's like simultaneously a positive and a negative. Like a positive in the sense of like you will get people back in the game and you will grow. Grow is a loose term, because there is a negative aspect of you're pushing out people the same way that standard pushes out people, which is that other like negative of standard rotations of there is an end point to all of this. So that sounds dark, but like when the new set comes out, you'll have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player have a deck that's no longer the meta, and the response to that is essentially either I get into this game further, or I'll walk away and come back in 3 years' time when they Give me better dragons.
Yeah.
But that's one thing I want to add, right? So I've talked about this at length, and I've talked about Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot, and I'll get to my very last point here, which is interesting that you say that too, is that I want to be clear as well, and let me be clear. But I want to also address something that's important, is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has this glaring problem. This is why I opened with, it's a chud game for chuds, and I hate it. That's why I opened with that, and then gave it a huge, gleaming review and said everything was great, and it's all wonderful, is that it's not entirely true to say that this legacy support makes these decks competitive. The most competitive these decks will ever get is a complete overhaul. We're talking every card is new. They just share the same name. And then 1 or 2 cards in the original set that's just good enough to make it in makes the cut. You talk about I can't even think of an immediate archetype that comes to my mind when I think about a deck with legacy support that made it, right? What makes it is brand new decks, and legacy support for a brand new deck is like a 3-year-old deck, right? Yu-Gi-Oh! Has this problem where, because it's eternal, right? And this is the Modern Horizons 2 problem, is that it just gets better and better and better.
Yeah.
And the stuff, like I said to you, when I read that Shadol card, I went, this is like the wet dream of Shadol players.
Yeah.
It didn't make the deck good enough because the deck itself wasn't good enough. There are decks where every single card reads better than the best card ever printed for Shadols. Every single card.
Yeah.
I read a deck called Snake Eyes, which will date this video because that deck's the $1,000 dream deck that's the top of the tier 0 meta, the best deck without, by far, nothing beats it.
Yeah.
Fire King Fire King / Snake Eyes. And every card in that deck made my eyes widen and my heart pulse. I was like, this is the most insane I've ever seen. Every card in this deck is an extender. Every card in this deck, you could turn one card in your hand into a board of anything you want in almost the entire game.
Jeez.
They're so consistent that if your opponent removes your entire board, you can do it again and again and again. Your opponent can interact with you 3 full times in a turn, and you'll just go, cool, I'll still keep going. And if they manage to even do all that, they get to their turn, they break your board, and it translates to a new one, and then you keep going on your turn. It's the most ridiculous stuff I've ever read, and this is true about a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! And what that does is it's more stark than Magic. Whereas if Magic standard rotation happens and you get out of the game for a couple of years, we are seeing this in Commander, but we'll get to that.
Yep.
If you get out of the game for a couple of years, you'll come back to it and you'll recognize it. You'll come back to it and you'll go, well, this is I see, this is like the red deck of the format. I see, this is this deck of the format. That's cool.
Yeah.
I see these cards.
Or in some cases, you'd be like, oh, Kicker's back again.
Kicker's back again. Or this is we're back to Ixalan. So it's kind of all these kind of mechanics, but these cards are a lot, this is like a way better version of the
Cascade.
The Cascade, or this is like the X-Drop Merfolk. That's just a way better version of the one
Jade Light Ranger.
Jade Light Ranger. It's like, they've just made fundamentally better versions of these cards.
Jade Light Spelunker, I think.
Jade Light Spelunker, yeah. And it's like, that's cool. I see. It's like a modernized version of this card. No. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game where if you look at it and you haven't played for a good number of years, you don't recognize it.
It's a new game.
It's whiplashing. It's a new game. It's like, it's very stressful. It's like, you could be the top of your class in the game. You could be somebody who plays, from my perspective, somebody who played very competitively and knew the game in and out and interacted on the best in Australia. And then you go, I don't even know where I'd start with the deck here.
What the hell is a link summon?
And not just that, but it's more accurately to say, I don't know how to translate this into the best board because everything is so open. Everything is I could do this deck can do literally, 1,200 different things. Literally, by the way, there are 1,200 lines of play, and 4 of them are good. And I can work out 1,200 lines of play. You could feed it into an AI and it would shoot out legitimately 1,200 lines of play. And you go, okay. And you have to work out the best. And that also, and this comes back to your point much earlier in the conversation, which is it also incentivizes and to an extent requires net decking. And incentivizes and requires to a point reading comprehensive primers that other players and teams of players and groups of people have collated and built together, joining discords. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has, I don't see this very much in Magic, actually. This is funny. I see it a little bit, but not as much. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has discords, Facebook groups, social media platforms, Reddits, dedicated, almost like League of Legends, to specific archetypes. This is the Ancient Gear players. This is the Ancient Gear players subreddit, and this is how we build our decks nowadays.
There is no mono red Facebook group.
There is a mono red Discord because I'm in it.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. For the meme.
Yeah.
But it's very comprehensive.
It is, right? But it's it's not it feels different.
Yeah.
It feels different. Red, that'd be like me saying there's a dragon type Discord.
Yeah.
This is more there is a Phyrexian goblin Discord.
Yeah.
That's how it's like.
insane.
It's
It
like
goes
there are
down to like
it's
the
the pinprick. It's like if there are 50 different red decks, there are 50 different groups.
Yeah.
And each media platform has a group for that. It's like there are 150 plus champions in League of Legends. There are 150 plus different groups, one for each champion.
Yeah.
And there are up to 30,000 people in each group easily. The same thing with Yu-Gi-Oh!
Bard mains.
Yeah, r/Bard mains, r/Aphelios mains, r/Master Yi mains, r/Ancient Gear players, r/Blue Eyes players,
That's insane.
Medolce.
r/Medolce players, and we don't go on that one. But it's you know, like that's so it's insane. It's absolutely insane, and absolutely crazy to me.
That's interesting that it's that you have to keep up, because it really feels like when we talk about an eternal format, you don't expect that to kind of happen in terms of players dropping out entirely in the sense of we're done with the game. It's like go away, come back later. I find that a lot with Commander. It's harder with Commander, even though it's recognizable, it's actually harder for older players to get back into the game now because of how much product has come out and how many mechanics are now floating around the game. But when we talk about rotation, particularly in a standard perspective, all like from both a personal, an experiential, and like an anecdotal, like all three levels here, of not like scientific, but standard rotation basically kills a player base in a majority. Like a majority kills the player base. Like every time we've run standard here in Vault, we've managed to get up to about 6 to 8 players regularly, and then the second rotation hits,
They drop off.
it's all gone.
Yeah.
And then it's 2-3 more sets before I finally get the courage to do it again. And we get it back up to 6 to 8 players over the course of 6 to 9 months. And then, bam, another rotation. And we lose them all.
But it's also just the changing nature of like how people are interacting with card games, specifically Magic these days. It's like...
Well, this is talking about from like 2016, 2017 time as well.
Yeah.
Like this is 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So as well. So like it's interesting that Yu-Gi-Oh has that problem in an eternalized format as well, in the sense of like that archetype's gone now.
Yeah.
And you need to come back again to it later, and it's still going to be different.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was an interesting like thing, because obviously rotation, it's a big negative point. When things rotate, people leave. I mean, the biggest indicator of that as well is also the Brawl format.
Yeah.
Did everyone play Brawl at some point in their lives?
No.
Only when I played it on Arena.
Well, I certainly played it in Dominaria,
Yeah.
and then Kaladesh rotated out at the end of that year, and that was it. My deck just became a Commander deck.
Dude, I'll tell you. So I literally, when they announced it in Dominaria and they had like the Viason Sunspeaker, like unique like deck promo, I literally just instantly gave up on that format.
That was a box topper, right?
Yeah, box topper.
box
Sorry.
topper,
Yeah,
yep.
box topper promo. I was like, it was the buy a box promo.
Buy a
Yeah,
box
yeah.
promo, there we go.
And it was like, I just went, no, this is the most, this is skipped. I'm not going to talk about Twin Suns yet. But because that's not this day's conversation. I mean, that's a keyword for those for a later episode. That's a foreshadowing. I'm going to talk about Twin Suns today, but I think you've misunderstood the point. I think you've skipped the point. What makes Commander magical is not that it's a singleton multiplayer format. That is why it's different. But being different is just a thing you are. That's just the thing the game is. What makes Commander magical is, again, mostly the nostalgia variant. Point. But like the nature of how decks are built and how you express yourself and what the point of the format is. That's what makes it magical.
And in most cases, how long the game is.
Yes.
Like-
Because of the fact that you can always rely on being able to express yourself.
Yeah.
But if you have a standard format, it's not about expressing yourself. It's about playing a game.
I mean, even when you talk about Commander in the terms of expressing themselves, let's talk about like the speed of the format. The speed of Commander, from a competitive perspective, competitive Commander didn't really exist until like, was it 2017, 2018?
2018.
I would say that the pool wasn't large. It's more accurate to say the pool of cards that separated out of casual play wasn't large enough for CDH to become really its own format because power creep wasn't happening like it is today.
I think it was Edgar Markov deck.
Yeah.
Was the point, was the spot.
That's 2017,
because that was Commander Duel. That's when French Commander Duel came out, which was a 1v1 format that banned Sol Ring, and it was
banned Edgar Markov.
and then banned it, yeah. But the whole point of it was like it was a 1v1 like competitive format that turned it into an almost like modern style or Eternal style of play.
Yeah.
Except it was like it was Highlander. It was single point, which now exists as 7-point Highlander,
or
without a commander,
known as Australian Highlander.
Australian Highlander, yeah, without obviously a commander in the command zone, as opposed to what French commander, the dual commander, was.
There can only be one, mate.
There can only be one, mate.
And then now we've reached into this world where we're doing competitive commander, where players are sitting down at a 4-player multiplayer table and busting out an Eternal, like it just harkens to people playing Eternal. When I say Eternal, I mean like the Eternal format, the vintage format, where it's bam, cool, your go, and I win next turn. Like it's like a turn 2 to 3 format. When originally Commander was like quite a long form format.
Yeah, I've had my Hornet Queen conversation a few times on the show.
Yeah. But even at high levels of play in Commander pre-2018, we're still talking like minimum 5 turns. Generally.
Yes, in the sense that I think that the combos that are as concise as you see them today didn't exist in the same space.
Yeah.
Like, as in, you're talking about like Doomsday Xur era, whereas it wasn't like Thorical Consultation era.
Yeah.
So, for sure, the combos have become more concise, and that makes those decks easier to win. I do think Commander nowadays is very much like... CDH is a complex beast. I think right now it's a 3 and 4 turn format, right? Because like as decks rise up that win with combo, decks rise up that stop with control.
Yeah, there's a decent stacks kind of.
Yeah,
a
but
couple of
just
decent
control.
stacks builds.
Not
Yeah.
just stacks, but just control in general. So stacks and playing on the stack.
Yeah.
It rises up really quickly, and the decks that want to churn out advantage over a long game are king. Like, Kinnan is a good example of a deck that doesn't just win on the spot with Thassa's Consultation because it can't play Consultation. It churns out a lot of advantage over the course of a very long game and takes it by winning through infinite combo, but takes it by winning through expensive cards after people have run out of resource and they find the weak spot and benefit and like engage on it. I think that it's a crazy beast. I think that I wonder what the point is.
Well, I mean, we're just talking about how, like, the point with Brawl to Commander, where Brawl completely missing the point.
Yes.
Where Commander was about expression.
And CDH is not about that. So Brawl, are you saying like Brawl almost tried to learn from CDH, not EDH? Is that what you're kind of saying?
I'm saying that Brawl... I wouldn't say Brawl tried to learn from CDH. I think Brawl was a manufactured form of almost competitive play of Commander that didn't naturally grow like French Commander did.
Yes.
And then morphed into competitive Commander. I think that Brawl was... What's he trying to, like, establish a...
Standardized.
I don't want to say standardized, even though it is a standard format, because Brawl was basically 60-card Commander in standard sets.
Yeah.
But a way to play the game that was... A way to play Commander that was consistent.
Yeah.
As opposed to the wild, longer games that Commander was experiencing through most of its life at that point.
Yeah, sorry to cut in, lads. It's almost 10 past 10.
That's all right.
Okay.
I've already told Mickey.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. No worries.
I want to add as well that here's the thing that I think what Brawl tried to do, right? What I would say is that it took all the pros that we just talked about of standard rotation and tried to apply it to Commander, right? Without thinking about the cons, I think.
Yeah.
Or at least saying the cons will come, we'll deal with them as they come. And they didn't realize how many cons that they were conjuring.
And that con was... People aren't going to play Brawl anymore.
The con is, what's the point? The
Yeah.
con is, and that's what I was saying earlier, was like, I don't understand the point. It's like, what's
Oh,
the...
sorry. I thought you were saying what's the point of my argument, not the point of Brawl.
Sorry.
Which is why I had to explain myself again.
Sorry. I guess I didn't come across like
It's
that.
also been a long day. And
sorry.
I finished my recorder league. And
I wonder what
format is it
sorry,
anyway?
I wonder what's the point of Brawl.
Oh, yeah. What's the point of Brawl?
Like, that's what I'm saying. I wonder what's the point, because then you go, you've missed the core element of what makes Commander tick. You've only applied the positive as a format that's dying already, which is why you're trying to make Brawl in the first place. I think that what Brawl tried to do was it said, look, if you're only playing Standard and you don't want to get into Commander, here's another format which your friends can be like, oh, we already play Commander and you don't have the card pool for us, we'll join your format, which just wasn't going to ever happen.
Yeah.
It's going to be, no, look, dude, I'll give you some cool cards and we'll get you started and you could join our format. That's always going to be the way it goes because Commander is what gets people involved with each other, I think.
I think like the most positive spin I could put on it was a response to reserve list issues around Eternal formats. I think that's the most positive element I can put on it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that one positive element didn't weigh out every negative around rotation. So
yeah, I think that...
And at the end of the day, if you played Brawl, like everyone that I knew played Brawl in the store, all 5 of us, all our Brawl decks became Commander decks.
And not just that, right? Let me just make one more point about that in the sense of Brawl. What's a con of a stand that we talked about? Well, not necessarily a con, but something that I kind of talked about earlier, where it's like, doesn't the metagame of Standard, doesn't it benefit from being more concise? Wouldn't Brawl suffer if the metagame was more concise? Think about that. I think...
it was also the speedier time of rotation as well.
Oh, for sure. But as in, like... As at first, not only is it the speedier time rotation making it even more and more and more concise, and more concise, it's a very, like... It's again, it's a funnel. Like, Winota got banned in Brawl. I remember that. That's something I remember.
Yep.
Because on Arena, I remember Winota was like the king. Now on Arena, I don't play Arena. Don't care for it. So I think it's 1v1 Brawl.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, because Arena doesn't support multiplayer. But on 1v1 Brawl, that, to be fair, it got banned because it was 1v1 Brawl, not because in a multiplayer format. I don't think it would have gotten banned if it was just multiplayer. But the fact that a commander had to get banned in Brawl proved that the what was the term you used earlier? Like, what rises to the top?
The cream rises.
The cream rises to the top, yeah. So these are like peaked or something. Maybe I'm crazy. No. Anyway, the cream rises to the top. I think that is shown there. But I think a commander, with the kind of disdain players like to put on CDH, the kind of disdain they like to put on competitive play in commander, I don't think that benefits at all. In fact, I don't think it is controversial for me to say that. I think that's like a huge issue. It's a glaring issue with the way that game tries to handle commander. Like, again, what's the point? Like, if my opponent has like a Brawl deck, they may not have more than one. It's not a cheap thing to have by definition, 60 card singleton. So they might only have the one Brawl deck, and if they're playing Winota every game, I'm like, it's like, let's get back into competitive mode, that's like the greater issue with Oathbreaker that showed up, where it was like, actually, just due to the nature of how these cards interact, this is a non-artificial concise meta. This is just a literally concise meta because this stuff is broken.
Yeah.
So because the game was so innately beyond Commander broken, it had all the broken things of Commander and then some, that cream that rose to the top just made people get to the point where, like, I don't want to play against this anymore, I can't do this. And that's what really would have happened with Brawl. Even if Brawl had taken off and it was given the chance that it deserved, I don't even think it... Well, I don't want to say the word deserved. I don't even know if it deserved it. But I definitely don't think it would have, because I think it would have ended up being like, oh, well, I just want to verse this anymore.
Yeah.
And it's only the same 3 decks winning every time.
I definitely think that Brawl created an accessibility into Commander, but then... like, it's an accessibility that is easily solved by just printing starter Commander decks, which is, you know, what's he solved. So,
I also...
Sorry, I was going to say the Brawl, like, those Brawl decks, especially the ones that came out around...
Throne of Eldraine.
Throne of Eldraine. Those ones, that was almost like what they're offering now with the starter Commander decks. It was like, here's a thing, although you had to slam, 39 more cards into it. That's kind of what it felt like. It was filling that niche because, like, they were much cheaper than the product. But then obviously there's the whole arcane.
They included arcane signets.
And that's the thing, right? That's why it's so messed up. It's like they also realized in that product that they weren't selling it to Brawl players. There were no Brawl players. So they weren't selling it to them. So what they do? They put arcane signet there, so Commander players kind of felt required to buy it because it was a super staple.
It was a chase product.
Super staple. And those cards were legal in Standard. Corvold was legal in Standard. Because I have a friend who played 3 of them in Standard.
Yeah.
Wow. And the deck was sold out pretty instantly. So they had to buy them on secondary market, and they were $55 each. So look, look, I don't know how long we've been talking about Brawl, but it's been too long. It's been too damn long.
Too damn bad.
The problems of Brawl had almost, what's ironic? The problems that Brawl had feel like they had nothing to do with rotation anyway. Like, it feel like that to an extent is true. But there's so many more problems. It almost feels like a drop of water in an endless ocean.
Yeah, it's that rotation that will, like...
nail on the head,
put the nail into it.
The straw on the camel's back, right? That kind of analogy. So, really, this is the question I have to you, right? In 1995, right? how valid does Standard feel? Very. In 2024, how valid does a rotation feel to you?
I mean, it
After
also
this
comes down
discussion.
to how many people are playing. Like,
Well, let's say it's a popular game. Let's say it's Magic the Gathering. Let's say it's picking up. Do you think Standard's going to be picking up in your store if you run a Standard format?
no.
No. Now at the time, Magic only had Vintage and Standard, so Standard was the only way to play. But what about other games? What about newer games? Like, let's say, we start playing Star Wars Unlimited, right?
Yeah.
There's no announcement for Standard rotation Star Wars Unlimited, right? What do you feel is going to happen when all these people in your store, and let's be honest, we've had great success with Star Wars Unlimited.
Yeah.
We've sold tons of product, huge pre-releases. What do we have, 48
48
players
across
in-
both stores. 48 tickets sold across per store.
Per store, yeah. Per store, 48 tickets. Huge events. Electric atmosphere. People are having a great time. And those players all are coming back on Friday. Because not all of them, sorry, I shouldn't say that. But a large majority were saying, yeah, we're coming back on Friday, we'll play more of this game, we'll trade more, want to play more standard, like more of the
Draft.
And constructed. People are coming in. I know there's a guy coming in at 10 in the morning. There's a group of guys who are coming in really early to play a bunch of constructed, and they want to
And crack open their packs as well.
Crack their packs, have a good time. How many of those players are going to stick around when, Obi-Wan, Boba Fett, Sabine Agro, when that all gets rotated out?
Well, I mean, yeah, that all comes down to what the rotation plan is. I don't like if we were to say that look, I think the positive of designing based on new mechanics and ignoring older mechanics is very important to the health of a game, to the lifespan of a game. Not necessarily the health, but I mean, yeah, to an extent the health. Eldrazi Winter for Modern was bannings, but then like the problems of Liliana and Innistrad, with the standard banning from that, from the standard rotation out from that, or even problems of energy in Kaladesh and rotating out from that, like meant that we got proliferate in Phyrexia All Will Be One. Like if Phyrexia All Will Be One had to be designed with energy still existing in a format, there is no way we would have had such a great poison counter proliferate world for decks in even in standard. Because they would have to design that whole set, even in limited, like the limited environment of draft and sealed is also designed in a way, it uses cards that are designed for the standard format. So if they're designing, proliferate and poison counters in a single set for limited, but they're caring about energy counters, then it's going to be a completely different beast. And probably, honestly, with how bad energy time, the era of energy was, like, it probably would not be as good as it was. The Phyrexia sets.
Sure, that's true. To be fair, that's a lot of speculation. I think that at the same time, it's like, look at the way, again, we talk about games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And stuff, it's like, again, creating support for legacy archetypes is not always making those legacy archetypes insanely broken. And it's not always going to go, we have to tread on eggshells entirely because we can't make one of these cards too good in the past. Because, again, Magic's more than willing to interact with the secondary market. They're more than willing to represent their economics with secondary market in mind. Just in the conversation of the Throne of Eldraine Brawl decks, we've established that they're more than okay with thinking about the secondary market and make decisions in their economics. So, much like Yu-Gi-Oh!, why aren't they doing that? If the energy becomes a big problem, you ban more energy cards. They banned energy cards before, they ban them again, right? This is obviously in the context of, this is like in a environment where Magic has never had a standard format. It's not in this environment where they've just introduced this eternal thing. As in, if Attune with Ether was banned in standard, it's still banned now. It's not randomly unbanned.
That's true.
If it feels like it's not going to make the impact that it does, it gets unbanned. It gets unbanned. But here's the thing. This is the important part. It's not all or nothing, right? Right? It's not all or nothing. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, and I didn't mention this one earlier for those at home, it's not banned or unbanned. It is banned, limited, semi-limited, unbanned. Or no longer on list is another thing they use for that. Which means that you can play none, 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3, and then 3 out of 3. Now, in Magic, 4 of a kind makes that ban list more comprehensive and strange. Going from 4 to 3 in a deck is a lot less impactful than going from 3 to 2 and then 2 to 1.
Do you think then having a banned, restricted, limited kind of build is much better than a rotation for a game like Star Wars Unlimited?
I think, for Star Wars Unlimited specifically, I agree. And one of the things I say about this format, and this is going to sound so weird, but it's like, I really think, and I've landed on this just then, is that because playsets are 3, decks are 50 size, and the playsets are 3. I think at playsets of 3, a ban list feels a lot better than playsets of 4.
It's much knocking consistency out.
The math is much different. So I feel that for me is, I feel like Star Wars Unlimited would benefit a lot more from a ban list and from an Eternal format than it would for a standard rotation, because I question the validity of collectability in a game like this. B, I also think that the rotation, I don't think the game, this is true about Universe Beyond, I don't think that the IP and what the kind of players the game's getting involved are going to necessarily be the hyper-competitive, want to enfranchise themselves in a standard rotation. And I hope that I'm wrong, but I don't think that's the case. And finally, C, is that I think that you're in a very limited universe that you've dove headfirst into.
Yeah.
Rotating out a Sabine just to introduce a new Sabine makes the game stale by definition.
I also think that the rules are currently designed in a way that allows for, that punishes people for playing 50 Sabines.
Yes.
As well, because there will be a time eventually where there will be 50. There will be times 3? There will be 12 different Boba Fett cards at some point in the future. There will be 12 different Boba Fetts.
In the perfect world, the game just continues infinitely.
Yeah, if it continues, yes.
Hypothetically.
So the way that the rules are set up when it comes to naming, which is something I flagged with you guys last week about, in the store, not on the podcast, but their rules for the naming says you name a card and it doesn't care about subtitle. By having a card like Regional Governor, which is name a card, players can't play that card, and you just go, Sabine Wren. Someone's deck of 50 Sabines is now off.
Yeah. And that's the thing as well, is that you can have, just like Magic Reprints Lightning Bolt, if TIE LN Fighter, or LN TIE Fighter, I can't remember the name. I think it's TIE LN. Anyway, if the TIE Fighter, the 1-mana 2/1 is a really good Imperial unit, it can just be reprinted. Yeah. You don't need all of those, in the future, 6 sets down the line, you don't need every Imperial card to be new.
Yes.
You can just reprint Cell Block Guard, and you can just reprint TIE Fighter. And be like, hey, those cards are back in easy to access.
These are some core cards from the game's past that still operate now.
Yeah.
I feel like Grand Moff Tarkin's going to be one of those ones where it's oh, cool. He might rotate out for a while, but then
Maybe Fantasy Flight's learned from its time doing Netrunner.
Maybe.
Because I remember Netrunner did a rotation not long before it finished up, where because they wanted to publish a new core set because of their original core cards were actually not that good anymore because of power creep. Some were still good. They basically took a whole bunch of cards from the first couple of sets, blocks, and then put them into the new core product and said, these are all now core cards. And then all these so they're now all legal to play in the standard format, the competitive format, the tournament format. And then all these cards from sets previous back that aren't in the core product are dead. So they learned from that because not long after that, Netrunner kind of died.
Yeah.
And then and then they lost the license because Hasbro didn't renew it. Well, sorry, WotC didn't renew it.
Classic.
It's even online games. I played a game called Duelist. It was Duelist with a Y in there. And it was a tactics battle. It was on a grid, but it played like Hearthstone. And that game went through the same thing. It was we have too many sets and we're going to do a standard rotation. Players just dropped down to the hundreds. Just nobody was playing it anymore. And they're that was kind of a big mistake. We're going to undo that. And then Bandai Namco bought it and went, no, you guys are releasing a new expansion every 2 months. Release 4 expansions in 8 months, or we're going to get a new team in. And they were oh. So they released 3 expansions, and they went, we can't keep designing cards for this game because we can't release enough product that Bandai Namco is going to keep supporting us. And they were and then Bandai Namco were this just doesn't make enough money. Kill it.
Interesting.
So I see that happen. It's interesting.
Yeah, it was a really interesting way to approach a card game because I watched you play quite a bit of Duelist back in the day, and
that's a great game.
That and what was the other one? Minion Masters.
That's still around. Minion Master still kicks around. The game's funny. The game's not nearly as good as Duelist. I played it with I was trying to fill the Duelist void, but anyway. So basically, closing statements. Right, talk about standard rotation. I don't personally believe standard rotation has a place. I think that there are pros and cons to all things in life, and I think the pros and cons to standard that we've determined today are very valid. Mm-hmm. However, I think that Magic the Gathering is a great case, a great case on players don't want it, It's not something the players will prioritize if they have any other opportunity. And I think that if it is thrust upon you in 2024 and onwards, if it is thrust upon a player base, it has also been proven that they are not interested in that. And I think that there is no way to resolve rotation without thrusting on people. You can be as prepared as you want for this game. It won't work. The only reason Pokemon works as a game with a rotation as heavily as it has it still today is it offers no other way to play the game, and it is 2% a card game. Pokemon is 98% a mega fucking $billion industry.
Look, it's Charizard.
Like it is toys, and it is video games, and it is pajamas, and it is everything.
It's a brand.
It's a brand. Pokemon is it's a huge multi-billion-dollar brand. And if it wasn't that, it'd be dead.
Yeah, look, I think it's I don't want to say it's kind of a necessary evil, but in the sense of that, like, the amount of effort involved in switching it across to a form that is no longer required, in the sense of like micro bands and putting, like, well, I say micro bands, like updating bands and moving things in and out quite regularly, curating the card list rather than the set list. I think that would be the amount of work required to shift into that for a game like Magic would be immense. I think they could do it with Pioneer. I think they could absolutely just, like, standard is dead, long live Pioneer, let's get more heavy-handed on the rotating of bands rather than the rotating of full sets. But yeah, I think it's if a card game is like starting like Star Wars Unlimited, I agree that it doesn't need it. I think if a card game already is enfranchised into a rotation format, it's very hard to break out of.
Sure, but when we look at the let's look at like a perspective of games that are new and don't need one versus game that probably needs it. Like I feel like it's like you were talking about Magic, and I think that's correct.
Yeah.
But I don't.
Well, we're talking about a market share of well over 70% of.
Sure, I don't disagree with market share, but let's just talk about just physicality of games, right? When I talk about in today's world of card games, how valid is a standard rotation, and it's like in Magic entirely. In everything else,
no.
So and that's what I think too. I think that's where it comes down to, and I'm like, I really hope that I don't have to. I really don't have to tuck IG88 into a deck box, and I don't want to. I think at the core level of it, I don't want to buy cards I can't use. And in a world of online games and such, in a world of technology where, you know, everything is hard to, like, create physicality, it's hard to really own anything. Look at the Ubisoft dilemma.
Even if you have a physical only game, like, it's been ripped on Tabletop Simulator already.
Tabletop Sim. Everyone, if I can access the cards for free, I just will, right? Because at the end of the day, like,
just want to play the game.
And the most important part about this, right, this we haven't even touched on, right, and this is why Standard is so frustrating for people, is that these cards aren't real. Like, this man is not real. Like,
this guy right here.
Like, I have...
This guy back there is not real.
I have Star Wars Limited cards right in front of me. This doesn't do anything. That's the important point. This is a piece that allows me to pretend that I can do these things in a game. Like... This doesn't have a chip in it that does these things. If I'm playing Magic Arena, the cards actually do these things in front of me. I'm not pretending. But this is make-believe, right?
Yeah.
So if
you have a cardboard representation of a mechanic.
Exactly.
Of a non-physical mechanic.
I'm not allowed to use my cardboard representations anymore. They go back to being what they physically are. And when you're confronted with the fact that they're physically pieces of card, it's hard to commit to. It's hard to, especially as an adult, which is the kind of person who has the funds to keep up in today's economy with these games, it is hard to commit to.
So on that note, thanks for watching along. Let us know in the comments, should standard rotation exist? Why shouldn't it exist? Why should it exist?
What are your experiences with the standard rotation? If you've ever interacted with it, did you stay? Did you leave? Should you stay? Should you go? Connor, end us on a point. End us on a point right now.
God, you just put me on the spot now. This is terrifying.
Do you want a camera or not?
Not. You know what? Not if it comes with this.
Wash your goddamn hands, everyone.
Wash your
Yeah,
goddamn
thanks so
hands,
much for
yeah.
watching, everyone. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel,
Ring the
get the
bell.
bell on and get notified every time a new video goes live here on the YouTube from the Vault, or subscribe to the Spotify if you're watching on Spotify as well to get notified when a new podcast goes live here on the platform. We want to know in the comments, or if you're listening and watching on Spotify, there will be a Q&A that you can contribute to as well. That is asking those questions. Should standard rotation exist? What games should have it? What games shouldn't? And how do you think standard rotation could exist or should exist, if it should exist anymore?
Yes to all. And
Yeah.
goodbye.
And goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Stay safe. Wash your goddamn hands.
Bye,
Bye everyone.
Bye, bye, everyone.